everybody? It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome, and I have to say that I am so excited for today's recording. Welcome to the next stage of the DC animated live show. If you actually followed me on my channel, The Lawn Gnome, you may remember this show when I originally co-hosted this with my friend Brian Lomax over at Brian Lomax Movie Talk, and when he officially rode off into the sunset, Cammy, of course, was willing to carry the torch and step in just as she was diving headfirst into the deep end of the comics world. And so, Cammy, I just want to say I am so glad to still have you here and beginning this brand new chapter of this show that I have so much fun doing.
Oh, this is one of the highlights of just doing videos as a whole. I love diving into these movies with you. I love talking about it. I'm still over the moon that I was passed on the torch to continue this, but these conversations are always fun.
Yes, and just so you guys know, if you do enjoy this video, don't forget to leave a like. I will actually leave a playlist of the original 16 episodes from my channel so you guys can check out how this show has evolved. And don't forget to leave a like and a comment, and if you want to see more stuff over here, please do not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you are up to date with all of our latest content, because as I said in a video just very recently done with April, that, we unfortunately had life hit us hard, all of us in different ways, that all of our Halloween plans had to be pushed off. But if you have been watching this channel for the last couple of days, you might have seen some very Halloween-themed videos, and believe me, there is nothing wrong with that. But I am very excited to talk about the 2021 offerings of the DC Animated Original Film Library, and of course, the ones that we're going to be talking about today, which is from the DC Animated Universe Library. And we are definitely going to take this show to new heights in 2022. We're not just going to sit here and review these movies. I think we're going to do some rewatches, some comparisons of these specific films, because there are so many to choose from. We have storylines even, so we can really take these animated films and work on them with a whole new level. And I think we're finally going to bring some of the animated television shows to this discussion show as well, especially next year when we celebrate the 30th anniversary of what I call the greatest cartoon of all time. And that, of course, is Bruce Timm's baby, Batman, the animated series. But today we are here to talk about 4 films. Technically, it could end up being 3 because we got another 2-parter that is most likely about to be created into a deluxe edition, which is going to be a combined movie. But anyway, we definitely have a diverse selection, a very interesting group of films. And I am really excited to talk to Cammy about them. So let's begin, Cammy, with the first one, which definitely comes out of the blue. And that is Batman: Soul of the Dragon. One that is actually labeled an Elseworlds title. And when it comes to Cammy, she loves that word in DC vocabulary. So in this movie, we see Batman taken back to the 1970s in a very interesting story of espionage and mysticism, going back to a portion of Bruce Wayne's past when he was under the tutelage of old sensei at Nanda Parbat and had encountered many interesting characters, many of which are staples in the DC universe. You may not know them if you don't read that many DC comics, but these are names that people do know and do know well. So, Cammy, I gotta ask you, what did you think of this film?
I liked it. Okay, but let me preface this conversation by saying, overall, I am not a huge fan of 1970s martial arts films. They're just slow paced for me. They're very one-dimensional. I find them to be kind of boring. I hate to use that word because I know they're action-packed. I know they're very popular. I know they're very pop culture-esque. They're definitely a part of our mainstream, and it really has shaped films as a whole and the way that we do action sequences and a ton of actors, obviously, that went from different generations. You know, obviously the 70s was the height of Bruce Lee, and then eventually we got his offspring, Brandon Lee. But it really did segue us into, you know, some really beautiful films, but I don't always categorize those films as martial arts. They're more like action films to me. So that said, I did enjoy the storyline, but much like I feel about 70s martial arts films, this one was a little slow for me. It was a little boring at times, and I did find myself not as engaged as I normally am. That doesn't lessen the story, though. It's very well written, and we get some fantastic characters in this story. And I will emphasize that quite a bit in this conversation, because I think there are a couple of standout characters, and you don't see them a lot when it comes to animation on screen.
Okay, I can definitely understand where you're coming from. I will definitely say what I really appreciate about this film is that it's very different. I found it very interesting that this was more so a Bruce Wayne story rather than a Batman story. That's one of the interesting parts about it for me. Now, I definitely see where you're coming from about the fact that they really took a lot from 1970s, you know, kung fu cult films. And you mentioned names like Bruce Lee, and there were so many other big names like Sonny Chiba and David Carradine. Like, these were the men that really shaped the pop culture phenomenon that was the kung fu film or the karate film, and really brought very interesting aspects of Asian culture to the United States. I mean, Bruce Lee, you want to talk about someone who truly embraced his heritage, but also just embraced America? That's what Bruce Lee was all about. All he wanted to do was bring his love of his culture and his style of martial arts to America for other people on the other side of the world to learn. And I always admired him for that. But I actually went into this movie less as a kung fu film from the 1970s and more so one of those great James Bond films with Roger Moore. That's what I grabbed from this story, because you had the music. I say the soundtrack was phenomenal. I loved how they really captured the time period, because one of the few things when it comes to any kind of movie that focuses on a time period, there's a lot of people that will say, you know, it's supposed to take place in such and such, but it doesn't feel like it takes place in such and such. Now, outside of the scenes in Nanda Parbat, you really feel like you are in the 1970s with this movie. The outfits, the cars, the old school computers that Bruce has in his nightclub in his penthouse apartment. And it's also very interesting how they tried to rope in his lore into this kind of story, because that's a real challenging thing to do. But I also really appreciated that they gave us the enemy being Cobra. Cobra is entity in DC Comics that I didn't actually know much about until I actually saw a few episodes of Batman Beyond. But Cobra is an agency that has lived in DC for a very long time. I just read Mark Waid's Flash run, and Cobra was one of the adversaries in one of the story arcs that I actually read. But names like Lady Shiva and Bronze Tiger, these are names that I had been hearing in passing, but I never actually saw them in the comics. And sometimes I would see them, but it would be very rarely in the animated films. I saw Bronze Tiger in Suicide Squad. Hell to Pay, which is another one of those movies that really wants to capture the essence of 70s grindhouse films, which is something that I'm pretty sure if you saw, you would definitely take away from that one. And Lady Shiva is a character that I'm starting to see a lot more in comics and in DC animation. She's now currently in season 4 of Young Justice, which is now airing on HBO Max as we speak.
Well, Well, and I think that was why it was a good timing for the Soul of the Dragon, because you are seeing a resurgence of these characters. This isn't the first time DC has introduced these characters, obviously. I mean, you can take it back decades, but I think the importance here is really structured on the characters that were chosen for this film, because they are very martial art heavy. And when you're talking about martial artists that really stand out in the DC universe, it's so important to get hard-hitting players. And so putting Ben Turner in there was so pivotal. And you know, the fact that he did kind of put that Easter egg out that he went at, you know, and he said it low key too, you know, I've been known as the Bronze Tiger. And, you know, you definitely just kind of get those goosebumps, because you're like, yeah, this is what this film was intended to be. But I totally agree with you. I was definitely vibing on the whole James Bond feel. I definitely got that from it. Just the pacing of it, the whole grittiness to the cinematography, the whole layout. And you had mentioned the computer screens. I'm glad you did, because that was definitely a standout for me too. I got Tony Montana feels when he opened that up. I was like, oh yeah, this is great. He's checking on his club. He's checking on the people.
Well, another character that is a very predominant character in this film is Richard Dragon, who is a character that I never knew about. And this was also the perfect time for a character like Richard Dragon to show up in DC, because in the world of Marvel right now, one of the most talked about Marvel characters is Shang-Chi, another Asian character who I didn't even know has been in Marvel Comics, nor did I even know how long he has been in Marvel Comics. He's been around since the 70s, and so has Richard Dragon. But Richard Dragon, that opening sequence in the movie, James Bond right off the bat for me. The lush island landscape, the espionage, the music, the hidden cameras are like, oh, this is so... I was just enjoying that opening sequence. There was a lot of times where I just was watching this movie and I was like, oh, that is so cool.
Yeah, it definitely has a lot of cool vibes. And, you know, once again, you nailed it. I said there was a couple of standout characters for me, Ben Turner, the Bronze Tiger being one, and then also Richard Dragon. And I'm really hoping what this animation film does is set us up for maybe a DC live action. That would be incredible to see those two storylines on the big screen. I think these are two characters that, whether they come together in this type of story setting where you have, you know, other students kind of training in a martial arts setting, or these characters are just kind of on their own path to evolving and becoming these characters, it would be a really incredible film. And I think now that Shang-Chi has actually made it out in the Marvel world, these would be a great comparison for DC to come in and have a little bit of friendly competition, because these are two incredible characters which step back generations. And I think this is one of that situations where, you know, I talk about it often, where if you take a character that has been around and long standing like that, you can appeal to multiple age demographics, but you've got to do it in a way where you're not offending the old school and you're bringing in a lot of those traits. So if they keep the feel that you and I both vibed off of from this animation, where you get the James Bond, the music, the clothing, you know, that right ambiance, I think these could be two incredible characters to bring to the live action screen.
Right. And now I want to basically tell you what I personally feel was the real strongest moment of this film. And then I want to tell you what is the weakest part of this film. The weakest part of the film is actually something that I agree with you on. But I still will say that the strongest part of the film, without a doubt, is the character development. The fact that we get those flashback scenes at perfect points, by the way. I think that the timing that they chose to see us go back into the past was a great idea, because the funny thing is, when you take a look at characters like Bronze Tiger and like Lady Shiva, these are characters that Batman is not necessarily friendly with. These are not his friends. They are his enemies. So that's why I like the fact that we got to see these characters in a very different light. And yet at the same time, we still get the mannerisms that we're familiar with. Like Lady Shiva, she is the strong silent type. Bronze Tiger, he's the hothead, but he still has a good heart. And I really appreciate how they captured all of those elements, because all those did was just added more layers for us to peel back and see what these characters in this specific universe of DC was all about. And I think it was done with real class, well done voice acting. I mean, I don't know if you knew this, but the guy who voiced Richard Dragon is the chairman from Iron Chef America.
That is cool.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that was the true strength of this film, the chemistry and the development of the characters.
Yeah, the development of the characters was really cool. I appreciated, I guess I should say, the introduction on how we kind of got a soft feel for each of these, but then how we were able to develop them individually. There was a charismatic camaraderie between the five of them. Obviously, that, you know, it was a storyline that drove all five bodies. Well, and then it went down to three, but in the end, we were able to see that development of each individual and kind of why they were where they were and why they were chosen for this mission. So yeah, character development was definitely on point. Glad you mentioned voices, because this is something that I needed to say. Oh, that was one of the down points for me in this movie, is that was a horrible Batman selection. Whoever voiced Batman, I was not feeling that at all. I mean, Batman has a very distinct, raspy type of voice. It's very deep. When you hear it, regardless of the fact that they've had many, you know, different individuals do the voiceover over time, it always had the feel. I did not get that at all from this film. He was so far removed from the essence that is Batman. And in a way, it's okay. It didn't destroy the film, because this is a much younger Bruce Wayne. And this really isn't a focal point of him as, per se, a crime fighter, versus more like training himself to be the inevitable Batman. So it doesn't ruin it, but it definitely stands out for me. It's something I wrote down and remembered. I'm like, oh, this voice is just killing it for me.
You've also got other well-known names. You got Michael J. White, who plays Bronze Tiger. You got Kelly who plays Lady Shiva. Like, these are all well-known actors and actresses. And these are also people that have given their voices to DC animation in the past. So these are well-seasoned people in the DC animated universe. Now, the weakest point of this film for me, I think, was a large portion of the story that involved Cobra. I thought that it was definitely just something that really didn't seem to fit for me, especially the ending, when it just gets too mystical, too fantasy, and I don't know about you, but I really did not like that ending.
Okay, again, I'm going to kind of play the devil's advocate here. I don't disagree with you, but where I think that it didn't fall off the chart is that if you think back to the 70s, and we've had this discussion concerning Doctor Strange, you get that mystical feeling because everybody was taking acid, everybody was tripping on something. So I think that in a way it kind of works. Maybe that was their way of kind of tying in the 70s and that psychedelic feel without necessarily tying in the drug aspect of it, because I definitely did get those vibes. It wasn't my favorite once again, but then again, this was a very slow-paced film for me as a whole. So, you know, having that type of conclusion was just kind of, you know, it was expected in a way. But there is a lot of mysticism that goes into any kind of ancient storytelling, anything dealing with, you know, an ancient mystic or a sword in this case. You know, I do feel that there is some kind of mystical ambiance that we should be feeling from that story. So it kind of worked in a way. It wasn't my favorite. I didn't connect with it, but I think that it worked for the story.
Well, in the end, like I said, I was actually expecting this one to be absolutely horrible, and I got to admit, it was definitely a big surprise just because I had a lot of fun with it, regardless of whether it's imperfect or absolutely perfect. I just had a good time. That's why if I was going to rate it, I would probably just give it a 3 stars out of 4.
Yeah, this one's probably going to fall in about a 2-star for me. Like I said, it wasn't fantastic, but it did have enough to be revisited. So in the event that, you know, it was on my shelf, I would rewatch it. And, you know, in hopes that we do get some maybe live action off of this concept. It's something I can definitely see myself watching and probably appreciating more if that was to happen.
All right. Well, then we're going to move on to the next one, which I got to admit, this one was the one that really got me excited, only because of the fact that I saw the title and it said Justice Society World War II. Now, as someone who is a comic book reader, I know for a solid fact that unless I am willing to put my kidneys on the black market, there is no way that I am going to be able to get myself copies of anything that represents the golden age of comic books, particularly in DC, because the Justice Society of America, for all of you people who don't know your DC Comics history, this was a team up that took place long before the Justice League even existed. This was an idea that started in All-Star Comics issue number 3, where they believed that Superman and Batman not only are part of the same company that makes them, but these are characters that live in the same world. And when Wonder Woman would eventually show up in the 1940s, these 3 characters would end up meeting other super beings, and eventually we would have our very first superhero team. Now, the closest that I have gotten to the golden age of comics was the Jeff Johns run of JSA, Justice Society of America, where they basically find a way to discover that these golden age heroes are actually in an alternate dimension, and they have officially come into Earth Prime, and now they are here and they are just doing what they do best, and that is stopping the forces of evil and saving the day for the good of America. That's what they did. And it finally gave me the opportunity to dive in and finally get to know some of these characters like Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash, Alan Scott, the Golden Age Green Lantern, and other characters like Johnny Thunder and Atom Smasher, and even Carter Hall, aka Hawkman, who is a character that I have known about since I was a little boy. But after reading some amazing Hawkman stories, including the ones that are part of the JSA run written by Jeff Johns in the early 2000s, this is something that I love, and this is something that I want to see more of. So knowing that we were going to get a Justice Society movie, I was very, very, very excited.
Justice Society is something that I'm getting more into, obviously, because of you, in terms of reading it. From a video perspective, it's something I've been on board with since day one. And this movie, I honestly should have filmed my reaction. I was like standing up, clapping in a couple of areas. This movie had me from the get-go. I thoroughly enjoyed this. And just like you said, it really gave us an insight to some characters that we don't really get a lot of, and I was eating up some of the storylines and the interaction between characters. I absolutely loved Black Canary in this. It gave me a whole new appreciation for her. Of course, you have the Steve Trevor line with Wonder Woman. That's always a beautiful relationship to watch that develop and that dynamic that they have. But this storyline was just so well executed. It was so well written, and it just flowed so beautifully. I love history. You know this. I say this constantly on the channel. But when you team it up with the Justice Society or the Justice League, there's just some magic that happens that is, it's just unbeatable. This was a great film.
Wow. I got to be honest with you, I don't feel the same way that you do.
Really? I loved this film.
And maybe that's just because of the fact that I was expecting so much more. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some parts of this film that I really do enjoy, but there's a lot of stuff in this film that I really don't enjoy, and I'm going to get into that as we move along in the story. First of all, I really like how the story begins. I really appreciated the fact that this basically has officially solidified the fact that we are now in the DC Universe Rebirth storyline that started with Superman, Man of Tomorrow. And now we have the Flash. And I liked how the movie begins. We're in modern times. We see Barry Allen and Iris West going on a picnic. And of course, even though this is Barry's day off, when evil is afoot, he knows that he has to step in. So I really like the fact that he goes to battle with Brainiac and he sees that Superman's there. And so he's like, hey, do you need a hand? I love that. That's what I love so much about Barry. Barry is such a nice guy, and all he wants to do is just help. That's all Barry wants to do. Now, my Flash growing up was Wally West, who started out as the original Kid Flash with Barry Allen and eventually would become the Flash because of a story called Crisis on Infinite Earth, which of course is known as one of the greatest DC stories of all time, told in 1985 by Mark Wolfman and George Perez. But I still do very much enjoy Barry Allen, and Jeff Johns is the reason why Barry Allen is back in comics again, thanks to a story called Final Crisis and Flash Rebirth. But I liked how he and Superman just are battling, and then when Flash sees that something's about to happen, and he just turns on the turbines, and all of a sudden, he has no idea where the hell he is. But one of the few things that he does know is that there's a very good chance that he is among friends because there are other superheroes in this place that is pretty much exactly what it's supposed to be, a war zone. And he encounters the Justice Society led by Wonder Woman, which was, I really appreciated the fact that they actually did have Wonder Woman. But here is the first thing that I did not like. I felt the Justice Society was incomplete. And it's because of the fact that there were two crucial heroes. Because when I think of the Justice Society, I also think of Dr. Midnight and Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern. I mean, look, it's great to have Jay Garrick, the original Golden Age Flash. Black Canary is an interesting character because she was part of the Justice Society, but then she became a more modern character. So she's a very interesting character when it comes to the Justice Society. It's great to see Hawkman, of course. It was great to see Our Man. Our Man, thanks to reading Jeff Johns's JSA run, I learned a great deal about Rex, and I like Our Man. It's a great idea, a great concept, but again, to not have Alan Scott and Dr. Midnight, maybe it was because they wanted to give the Justice Society a little more of a challenge. Because if I'm being perfectly honest with you, my friend, you throw the Green Lantern into a battle, and there's a very good chance that this battle is no contest, even with Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I guess maybe, not given the same background of history that you have with the JSA, obviously that I do, not knowing that those characters were pivotal in the JSA, I didn't miss them because I didn't know them. So for me, this worked very well. And maybe that was kind of what helped me to enjoy the film a lot more than you did. I guess it was the whole concept, kind of what you were saying, of going from Earth 1 and where we get to see how the Flash enters into Earth 2. I just love that concept. I love when we're dealing with alternate universes, and when we catapult right into Nazi Germany, that just solidifies the ultimate evil. And to me, when you're working with the JSA or the Justice League, you also get that empowerment of that team camaraderie. And so when they're working behind the idea of going to war basically for America, that just gives that extra punch to the golden age of comics, and I guess that just gave me that whole huge appreciation, and why I was such a fan, being a fangirl in the back, and just so excited as this film developed, because for me that was enough just to carry that plot line along. So having missing characters, not knowing who they were, was probably better for me, because had I maybe been more familiar with them, then I might have had the same feeling that you did.
One of the things that I really did like was the fact that the Flash, Barry Allen, is the one that goes into World War II and discovers the Justice Society. And I'm really glad that you did bring up the concept of Earth 2, because that was the big twist. That was one of the big pluses about this movie. I really appreciated the fact that they introduced the multiverse in this film, because the DC multiverse was originally introduced to the world in a story called Flash of Two Worlds. And it was a comic book where the Golden Age and Barry Allen, which was originally known as the Silver Age Flash, are in a comic together. So they're the reason why the multiverse was originally given to the masses. So the fact that they did use Barry Allen to meet Jay Garrick, that was definitely a nice homage to the DC history. So I definitely appreciated that as well. And I liked how the concept of the fact that Barry was not only in the past, but he was in a different universe or a different Earth, is when he uncovers Superman, and Superman tells him a little bit about his life, thanks to also finding Dr. Fate. That was another really cool thing that I liked about seeing in this movie. I loved that Dr. Fate had a role in this movie, because Dr. Fate is also a key part of the Justice Society.
Yeah, that was a really cool scene. I really got a lot out of that scene, and I like how they carried it out. I mean, it was really a lengthy scene in terms of all the information that we were able to compile. And I mean, again, I don't have anything bad to say about this, though, because for me, every turn was just more excitement, because I was getting more involved with characters that haven't seen a lot of light. So this was a win all the way around for me, and that was definitely a bonus scene.
Right. So that's where I really want to get a little bit dicey over here, because the part of the film that I really, really hated, and the reason why is because they never seem to get this character right. Aquaman. They didn't need him. I didn't think they needed him. The third part of this film reminded me so much of Justice League Throne of Atlantis and how poorly that movie was executed. I literally was saying to myself, are they trying to recreate Throne of Atlantis and trying to get rid of all the faults that Throne of Atlantis had? Because if that really is the case, my God, they are doing a terrible job. I think that bringing Aquaman into this story was such a bad idea. I couldn't be more further from the truth when I say that.
Yeah, I won't disagree with you there. I don't necessarily feel that it had a big place in the storyline. It just kind of felt like a filler, and it really wasn't even a great filler. But I was so enamored with the rest of the film that I just kind of threw it to the wayside, and I really didn't dwell on it that much. And I feel Aquaman is kind of one of those characters that we do kind of dismiss. I don't think it's intentional. I just think it is, unfortunately, how he's written into a lot of storylines when it concerns his presence. There's very few stories that have put Aquaman in a place of pure magic. I think one that comes to mind is something we've recently discussed, is Kingdom Come. But you know, he very rarely gets put in a place where it fits. And so yeah, I can definitely see what you mean by it was just a bit awkward and out of place.
Nah, it's like Bruce Timm did wonders with Aquaman when he originally brought him in Superman the Animated Series, and also in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. I mean, I remember when Justice League came out in 2001, I was really upset with the lineup because Aquaman wasn't in the lineup. And when I think of Justice League, I think of the seven. I think Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Flash, Aquaman, and Martian Manhunter. That's who I think of. That's the seven. So we may not have gotten him in the lineup, but we did end up getting an amazing Aquaman story in the first season of Justice League. So I really appreciated the fact that Bruce Timm was like, All right, guys out there, I hear you. I know you're upset that Aquaman is not on the Justice League, but here's a great Aquaman story. And he shows up a little bit later in Justice League Unlimited, and he's part of the Justice League. So it is nice to at least see that Aquaman got his justice thanks to Bruce Timm. And then you have Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder did a great job introducing him in Zack Snyder's Justice League. And James Wan's Aquaman film is awesome.
Oh yeah, hands down. I won't ever argue that any differently.
Yeah, so it's just a shame that for some strange reason, unless Bruce Timm is the one that's really helming the DC animated project, no one knows how to get Aquaman right. But if there's anything that I could say that's very positive, is I also really like how the movie ends, because clearly this is the starting point. The Flash seems to really want to create a team because he saw how amazing this team was in this alternate World War II. So that apparently is what we're anticipating in the years to come for this brand new DC Rebirth storyline. But I will just be honest with you, I really want them to take this idea of the Justice Society, and I would love to see more animated films with the Justice Society, because there are so many great stories and so many great characters that we can see thanks to this team.
Yeah, I agree. I think this ending set it up very nicely, and hopefully we'll get some more Justice Society of America films, because I do think there's a lot of stories to be told. And you made a very good point at the beginning of the conversation with how readily unavailable these comic books are to, just an average everyday person. And so to have some of these stories be brought to life, but also given new energy and new storylines and, kind of in a modern way, bring them into the 21st century, I think is really important, because it allows these vintage characters to never really lose that ambiance and that nostalgia, but it also reintroduces these characters to a whole new generation of comic enthusiasts. And for me, that's really what sold me hook, line, and sinker on this journey with you, is that I was able to kind of just take little bites of things, and each bite that I took made me excited about another story arc or another story completely. And I've read more comics and watched more comic related films in the last 2 years than I ever thought I would possibly do, but I'm loving it and I'm having such a good time doing it. So I'm hoping that by doing this and giving these opportunities to filmmakers, that maybe we can see some more of these great films brought to life.
Yeah, I mean, one of the few things that I do know is that one of the most popular current streaming TV shows from the because it's part of actually the CW universe, is Stargirl. And Stargirl on HBO Max is very much a Justice Society story, because there's a lot of Justice Society characters in there. You get to be introduced to characters like Dr. Midnight and Wildcat and Hourman and Stripe and so many other really great characters. And again, with the Black Adam movie coming out next year with Dwayne Johnson, Jeff Johns, when he was writing his JSA run, Black Adam was an integral piece of that story in terms of a villain or even an anti-hero. And because of the fact that Black Adam had such a big role, eventually Shazam would join the Justice Society. So I like the fact that this specific comic run existed in the time period that it did, because Jeff Johns really gave modern comic readers a chance to finally see and learn about these characters that have just not been in comic books for decades, and wondering what it would have been like to actually read about these characters before the Silver Age. And then we got those well-known names like, Arthur Curry and Barry Allen and Hal Jordan. This was long before them. So yeah, I'm telling you, if you really did enjoy these characters, you should definitely check out the JSA run from Jeff Johns, because it's classic comic book storytelling in a modern world. And I loved the fact that we had that in the years that we did, because that is something that we don't seem to really have much of right now in comics. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, look, the comic book discussions that we're having right now about some of the indie titles that we're reading right now, don't get me wrong, those are great, because it's great to have comic books about these, but sometimes you just want to go back to those simpler times of the good versus evil and the heroes in capes beating up the bad guys and saving the day. You want that sometimes.
And that's probably why we don't see a lot of it, because we're not a wholesome society anymore. I think if you look back to the time period where these stories were being written, you know, everything was a lot simpler. We were a different society. We integrated, you know, just the very minimalist kind of attitude. It was a family camaraderie. And if you look at organizations like the Justice Society and the Justice League, they are group efforts. You know, it takes one to help another, and it's a group effort to see the mission through. And right now, as the society that we've kind of formulated, we're all about the party of one and what one person can do to change the world. It's a very selfish society, a very ugly society that we live in. So I agree completely. JSA is something that I am very interested in going back and reading storylines from. And I feel that America would definitely benefit from more of these stories, because there's nothing wrong with the nostalgia, you know, keeping the nostalgia alive, but it's also nice. It's like, you know, in the winter months, you look forward to a cozy, comfy blanket. It kind of feels like that in terms of reading. You know, sometimes we just need something that just makes us feel good.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, if anything, this movie made me want to see more Justice Society, but for the time being, I would just give it a 2.5 stars out of 4.
I'm going to give it a 4. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was very excited throughout. This is something I definitely will revisit time and time again, and something that I do hope is just the beginning of more to come.
Well, let me just say this. If this is your attitude about those characters, then it makes me happy that they hit that kind of chord with you. And I really am hoping you'll get the opportunity to read about them in comic books at some point in time soon. So the next movie is actually the third 2-part film that DC Animation has offered us, and this was one that a lot of people were looking forward to because it is known as one of the greatest Batman stories of all time, and I am going to somewhat apologize, not so seriously, for all of you, because we are milking this story for all of its worth, because we have been talking about it for far too long, but we are going to be talking about Batman the Long Halloween, parts 1 and 2, and I'm just going to say it's going to be very hard for Cammy, because Cammy loves that source material, like, to no end. I am telling you, people. But Cammy, you've got to put your biases aside tonight. I'm really hoping that you can do it.
I will. No, you know, the beauty of this channel too is that we have visited this story in some way, shape, or form quite a bit in recent times. And so, you know, of course, I'll encourage our audience to go back and take a look at us diving into The Long Halloween as a comic, and in the future, look forward to a book to movie comparison. So I'll keep it brief, but you do know that my love for The Long Halloween runs deep. There are so many elements of this that I can sing its praises, but the way the story is written, the graphics on this, it's just so beautiful, and it really does tie into the movie here. I mean, you do get that same feeling, and I'm very appreciative that the movie is very dark, the setting is very deep. It's a challenge, though. It's a challenge to take something as beautiful as that story and make it into a film. So there are certain elements of this that I was disappointed with, but that doesn't make it a bad movie. But one of my gripes is the fact that it is 2 parts. That just irritated me to no end.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, when we take a look at the library that we currently have, we have so many of fan favorite Batman stories that have already been adapted to film. I mean, I am still going to go out there and say that Batman Under the Red Hood is still the best one. That's going to be my own personal opinion. But as someone who has seen The Dark Knight Returns parts 1 and 2, has seen Batman The Killing Joke, has seen Batman Hush, has seen Batman Gotham by Gaslight, I will definitely say that Batman The Long Halloween is not perfect, but it's not bad in the slightest. This is a very well done film. I think getting Jensen Ackles back, who voiced the Red Hood, to come and actually play Batman, to get Josh Duhamel to play Harvey Dent, great idea. To get the late Naya Rivera to voice Selena Kyle, great choice. You know, they did their very, very best, and I think that they did a pretty good job, because there were some poor parts of the story that came right out of the comic books, and then there were some parts that they did have to change a little bit for cinematic value. But again, I really don't want this to be a discussion comparing the book to the film. I just want to go and talk about the films. Part 1 is a great starting point. I love the noir atmosphere and animation. To a certain degree, there's a little bit of faultiness in regards to the way that the dialogue is presented and the animation. There just doesn't seem to be a match. There seemed to be a little bit of a disconnect in certain parts, but I just really love how this story just keeps you guessing all the way to the very end of part 1, and you're just excited for part 2.
Yeah, I agree with you on the dialogue, but just in reference to part 1, I think that there's not a lot of cohesiveness in the dialogue in part 1 until the end. I mean, it starts to kind of feel like it's setting you up for what is better in part 2, in my opinion. I just felt like the first couple of holidays were very rushed. And another thing that I think could have easily been done and was just kind of mulled over was the caption of the holiday. You know, you could have just easily taglined each holiday, and it wouldn't have bothered the film, because it just flows naturally. It just kind of lets you know, as a comic enthusiast and probably someone who has gone into this film having read The Long Halloween, where you're at in the storyline. And it's, you know, something that could have easily been added, and I think it was just lost. So it's just sporadically chosen on certain holidays. The holidays that they did selected, you know, are fine, but it's like, do it for one. If you're going to do it for one, do it for all, kind of a thing. And I think that, you know, again, I understand that there's a course of time too that they had to adhere to, but I felt also that beyond the beyond the beginning being rushed with the first couple of holidays, I also felt like there was a blur of a few holidays in between, you know, where they kind of just mashed them up to kind of move the storyline along. It worked, but I just felt kind of cheated because it didn't present all of the characters that I would have liked to have seen.
Right. I gotta ask you, what did you think of Calendar Man in this movie?
He's a character, that's for sure. He's definitely a very intriguing guy. The enigma to him, I know there's a better term for that, but the way his mind works, you know, he's like a puzzle box, basically. He reminds me a lot, obviously, of Edward Nygma, in the way that he thinks, the way that he kind of pieces things together. But I really enjoyed how he played off of Batman's sympathies and, you know, tried to make himself seem very important in this story. Like, I can help you figure this out, you know, because I'm good with numbers, I'm good with days. He's creepy though, and I love that about him. I think he adds that right factor to the story.
Yeah, the guy that they got to voice him is a man named David Dastmalchian. Now, if you don't know who he is, he's actually been in a lot of DC films already. He's already been in The Dark Knight. He was actually Polka Dot Man in The Suicide Squad this very same year. He is a guy who does a lot of comic book film, so getting him to actually voice the Calendar Man was such a stroke of genius. He added so many dimensions. He's a great character actor. I also really appreciated, you know, especially, again, really don't want this to be a book to film comparison. We're doing this later, but I really love how they did the Joker part of the story. They got it right, because it was something that we weren't sure was going to work in the comics, but it did. And it worked in the story as well, in the movie. And I just love the scene where I think my favorite part of the movie is where the Joker just literally says, "Oh shit." Like, I just love that scene. I laughed so hard when that happens.
Yeah, the Joker has a couple of scenes that are really good. I also love when he's trying to figure out how to operate the plane and then he just throws the manual out. You know, that's fantastic. But, I do feel that the Joker did get a lot of time. And this is kind of one of my irritations with the film is that, there's a lot of parts and pieces when it comes to the dialogue and the storyline of the Joker and where he fits in. But I think that by giving him that much screen time, it took away from other characters that I was really excited to see, like the Scarecrow and the Mad Hatter, and hoping to see the Riddler, like all of these things that just didn't happen. So it's okay. Again, I'm not bad mouthing the film. They did the best that they could and it worked. It's just I would have liked to have seen some characters get a little bit more screen time. It is so rare that I get to embrace the Mad Hatter, and I absolutely adore him. And I love the fact that they kept him very true to his character. He had Lewis Carroll dialogue down to a T, and I was just there sipping my tea like, yay, the Mad Hatter is on the screen. The Scarecrow is super psychotic. He's awesome.
Yeah. I also really appreciated the fact that they also wanted you to understand that this is supposed to be a time where Batman is still relatively a new hero. This is literally supposed to be like year 2 of his working in crime. And I think one of the best ways to show that was actually in one of the most obscure scenes of the movie. It's in the very beginning, where Alfred is waiting for trick-or-treaters and nobody comes. And so he and Bruce are having a dialogue, and then Bruce looks out the window and goes, "And do you think that?" And then all of a sudden, Alfred is gone. He's like, "I hate it when he does that." I'm like, oh my God, that is really funny. That was really, really clever. I like that.
Yeah, I caught that too. I was like, oh, so that's where Batman got it from.
Yeah, I also really appreciated Catwoman's role. I really think that they gave her a lot more in this movie, and I really did appreciate that. And then I also appreciated that we get the bridge gap between parts 1 and 2 connected with a post-credit scene in part 1. And it's where they are at the funeral of Carmine Falcone's son, Alberto, and we see a new associate that Carmine is working with, and then all of a sudden you see Batman's eyes turn green, you see the lady lift her head up, fade to black, like, oh, it's Poison Ivy.
Yeah, they very well depicted Poison Ivy. I love Poison Ivy. She's one of my favorite villains, and I thought she was very well executed in this film.
Yeah, because I'll be honest with you, she kicks off the first movie. Like when part 2 starts, like we literally get right back into it. And I will say, I was creeped out by her in that movie. Creeped.
Yeah, this was one of the first times where you actually did see her as the evil that she is. I think so often we take characters like Catwoman and Poison Ivy and we kind of make them a little bit whimsy, so they come off cute and feminine, but at the end they're straight up killers. They really are villainesses, and I think to see her through that lens was so important in this film because you really saw a very dark, devious side to her. You saw the control that she had over Batman, and you really saw her true power, how much connection she had to these plants and things that she works so well with, but how connected she was to make them have that control over people. And you saw how much control she had over Batman for 3 solid months, and I loved her. I thought she really shone in the second film, and having that segue was so cool.
Yeah, and I also really appreciated the fact that I love how it starts off being a very noir film, like it's really revolving around the mob and various gangs and all of that. And as the story progresses into the second film, we see more so of a world that is really turning to madness because the nuts are out of the nut house, and we see characters like Poison Ivy, like Scarecrow, like the Mad Hatter just running amok after the Joker's officially been put away. But it's just crazy to see that Carmine Falcone is so concerned about his well-being because of all of these murders that the Holiday Killer is doing, that he literally feels the only way to get himself to safety is by hiring these nut jobs to do his dirty work. And in the end, after we see what happens with Harvey turning into Two-Face, this whole idea backfires on him because you cannot control these maniacs, no matter how hard you try and no matter how much money you throw at them. In the end, they're going to want to take control.
Absolutely, and that's very well executed, and I very much appreciated the Mafia tie into this story. I love how much screen time it got also, because the richness of not only telling Falcone's story, but also Maroni's story, you know, and just how they intertwine and interweave, and how really they are the two sides of the coin, not pun intended, of the dismantling of Harvey Dent. And to see that, you know, you mentioned this is kind of like year 2 of Batman, but we do really get a feel of how young he is in terms of being a superhero, and how he's still kind of getting a feel of Gotham City. And I appreciated also that kind of interlaced into the storytelling on screen, because you do see Batman kind of taking a backseat and letting Harvey Dent take center stage. And then the villains really are the backstory here. So you do see bits and pieces of Batman, which is important to the storyline, because obviously there is that triad between himself, Dent, and Commissioner Gordon, but he doesn't take up a lot of oversaturated screen time. You know, you get Dent. Dent is really the heart of this story, and I think that's really important to visually get that.
And I also think what's really great about that part of the story, because the second half does really feel more like a Batman movie, but they still manage to hold on to those noir tones, which I think is really impressive. I also wanted to know what your thoughts were of Harvey's wife, Gilda, in this film, because she's a very crucial part to this story. And I got to be honest with you, I don't think they did her right in this film.
No, I was very disappointed with her depiction. I didn't appreciate the dialogue that she was given. She just kind of looked like a damsel in distress the whole time, and she's such a powerhouse character. And her dialogue with Dent just was off for me in this film. You know, again, we're not trying to do book to movie comparison here. We'll do that at a later date, but she's so much stronger in the comic book than she was portrayed in this film. You know, they made her very weak until the very last scene where she's kind of explaining some things. But even then, it was just like the damage had been done.
Okay, I understand. I agree with you there. I was definitely intrigued by how the film ended. Again, not trying to compare, but I did actually find it, for the purposes of the film, I think it made sense. I really do. But I also really liked how the ending of the film and the ending of the story ends with trick-or-treating again. And the fact that there is a little boy that ends up at Bruce Wayne's door dressed up as Batman asking for candy. I thought that was a great way to end it. I really did.
Yeah, that was super adorable, and it gave me all the feels of why Batman has always been my favorite superhero, and why Alfred is so adorable. I mean, you know, he's great. He just goes along with everything, and he appreciated that also. You could see it in his face.
But now I gotta ask you now we gotta talk about the elephant in the room. That post-credit scene. That was something I did not expect.
Yeah, that was a little out of left field. I mean, all of a sudden you see, you know, two very prominent superheroes that have nothing to do with the story show up. It was cute. It was kind of like a trick or treat kind of thing, but I don't know. It was just a little offset.
But the funny part is, that now we didn't even realize until the very end of this story that this story is part of the ongoing Rebirth storyline, because we see Flash and I just wanted to figure out how the hell Green Arrow showed up. Like, when did they recruit Ollie? I didn't know, but I just was so surprised to see Alfred open the door, see the Flash and Green Arrow at the door. Clearly, they are there to recruit Batman into the Justice League. And I just love how Alfred turns around and goes, "It's for you, sir." I just thought that that was wonderful.
Yeah, again, Alfred steals the line there. He steals the moment. He made that scene worthwhile, but yeah, it works, I guess, in terms of.
It was bold. They had
the
some
long
balls.
Halloween had, well, the long Halloween at that point had been concluded. Like, the story was told, so let's just kind of leave it open-ended to tell another story, you know? So in that case, in that situation, looking at it from that vantage point, I can appreciate it, but it just kind of threw me for a loop. I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting these two to show up, you know? But again, Alfred steals it with his one-liner.
Hey, look!
I believe these are for you, sir.
Hey, listen, if anything, Supernatural fans are going to probably be so excited because it looks like Jensen Ackles is going to be the voice of Batman for a while.
Oh, cool. That's good. He does a very good Batman.
That's the way that I look at it. If this Batman is supposed to be part of this brand new DC Rebirth storyline, then, oh man, Jensen Ackles, he's going to be Batman for a while. That's pretty cool.
I can live with that.
Yeah,
much better than the guy that voiced in Soul of the Dragon.
I definitely see where you're coming from. So yeah, I mean, I would probably say that I would give each. Honestly, it's a great package, but I got to break it down individually. I would actually give both films the same score. I would give them both like a 3.5 stars out of 4. They're great to watch. The aesthetics are very pleasing, regardless of how you feel about it compared to its comic book counterpart. As a movie on its own, I think it holds water, and it's definitely got some rewatchability to it. I think so. Both of them. So 3.5 stars for parts 1 and part 2.
Again, I would have appreciated if it was one solid film. It's nice to know that it is going to be coming out that way eventually. But the breakup was just a little bit awkward for me. But I will give each respective film 3 stars because I do appreciate the grittiness to the film. I do appreciate the noir feel that you've mentioned. Again, you can't compare oranges to apples, even though it is the same story. It's so hard to take an epic story like The Long Halloween and make it a perfect film. You're not going to do it. You're going to miss some elements. You're going to have to, for the sake of time, keep some stuff out. So I don't fault them for that. You know, I'll have my own personal opinions when it comes to certain characters that I wanted to have more screen time at all, or, you know, the development of certain characters, but overall they kept the truth of the story intact, and we got the message, and it was beautifully done, you know. So yeah, solid 3 stars for 1 and 2.
All right. Well, everybody, that's going to wrap up our first DC Animated live show over here on That's Comical. I am really excited for some future episodes. We are definitely going to be doing another episode before 2021 comes to a close, because we have some films from the other DC animation library that we need to discuss. And let me just tell you all, it is going to be a very diverse set of films. But I am also very excited for another video that's coming out in December. We are going to be talking about The Long Halloween again in a new episode of Who Wore It Best. Cammie and I and Andy will be joining us, where we're going to finally go into the book and the films, and we're really going to start to get into the nitty gritty. And I'm just excited for this to actually happen, because this means I can finally stop reading The Long Halloween and I can finally move on to Batman Dark Victory. So anyway, everybody, I really hope that you had a good time watching Cammie and I talk DC animation. This is one of our favorite things to do, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.